All right, here we are. Lawyer Talk Podcast. They don't teach you that in law school. They don't teach you that in law school. Sort of a breakdown, let's talk about Luigi. And I'm not talking about Mario and Luigi. We're talking about the assassin. And I couldn't, I can't stress that enough. But look, first, lawyertalkpodcast.com is where you can check us out. We have a series here. They don't teach that in law school. Troy Henriksen working with me and my law firm, Palmer Legal Defense. Look, I am a lawyer. If you need help, give us a shout. In Ohio, elsewhere, I consult all over the country at times. But the purpose of this is to sort of discuss stuff for folks who are maybe in law school, thinking about law school, or just curious about the law. You don't have to be a law student to enjoy this, because the idea is to take this legal nonsense that people talk about out in the real world and then maybe translate it and explain what's really going on in a way that everybody can understand it. And this is a great platform to do it. So Troy, we've been following this Luigi homicide case.
Of course.
And this is for those who haven't watched the news in the last 2 weeks. This is the guy who assassinated the president of United Healthcare, or the CEO of the United Healthcare Insurance Company.
Allegedly.
I think allegedly. I think he did, though. I think he's confessed to it. I think he is on tape doing it. So look, I represent folks charged with crimes, and if I only represented innocent people, I'd be broke. Because that's fair. So this idea on Matlock, where you only represent innocent people, it's nonsense. You couldn't earn a living doing what I'm doing. So then you would say, well, what do you do for these people? Well, sometimes the idea is, if the government can't prove it, we go to court and we fight the case. Sometimes I've had clients who are wrongfully accused and just maybe got the wrong guy or didn't do what he was accused of doing. Sometimes my client is guilty as the day is long, and my job is to get them through the system as fairly and efficiently as we can and minimize the backside. What's the sentence? What's the outcome going to be? So all those things come into play. And so your criminal defense lawyer does a lot more than go to court like Matlock and only represent innocent people. In fact, I have good long-term referral sources who will tell them, look, they've told me this, and I'm just like, ugh, because they say, look, there's this high publicity case. I know the guy, but I'm not going to send somebody like that to you. He's such a dirtball. And I'm like, all right, well, fair enough. I appreciate your stance on it. I represent dirtballs sometimes.
I feel like what I've noticed, at least in the last year, is maybe these people aren't innocent, but I do see a lot of potential overreach maybe. And that kind of pulls us into here, where I was noticing on the indictment that came out, I believe yesterday, was he was charged with first-degree murder with regards to terrorism. And I believe it's the language used, intended to intimidate or coerce a civilian or government population.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
Mm-hmm.
But you're right. So overreach look, a lot of times there's a public figure who's accused of a crime, and I just said I represent dirtballs, but for the most part, I like my clients. I like even the guys who have done the worst of the worst things. There's redemption in almost everybody. There's redeeming qualities in almost everybody. There have been a few over the years I've represented that I thought were just genuinely bad people. And I would say only a few, maybe 2 or 3 in 30 years, who I just thought, this dude's a psychopath. This dude's just a bad guy. I've had 2 or 3 of those, and I've represented thousands of people probably, and most people are good people. Most people are good folks who have had a problem. Maybe they've got a psychological or mental health problem. Maybe they've got a narcotics or a drug problem or a substance problem of some sort, or maybe they just made a mistake. It's like there's been one perfect in this world, if according to my religious beliefs, and it ain't any of us, right? So it's most of us are not perfect. Most of us have our flaws, and most of us have done stuff that we regret. And if you haven't, you're probably lying to yourself and you're lying to others. That may be some of the problems with the culture of these days, is that it's so unforgiving. This is a good transition into Luigi, because Luigi.
Yeah,
didn't get that wrong. Luigi. So look, you said something here that was, I think, interesting, and that is there's overreach, and you probably experienced that upstairs working for me. We've got guys who are clearly guilty of something, but they're charged with more than what they did.
Absolutely.
We're going to try a case in a local county in January where it's like that. Guy did something, but come on, it's an overreach. So why is there an overreach? Sometimes there's an overreach because in Ohio, particularly now, we have something called the Victims' Rights Amendment, where victims of crime get a say-so. Now, that on its face sounds great, but sometimes the tail's wagging the dog a little bit, where maybe that results in an overreach because you got people who are emotionally hurt, psychologically hurt, and they don't want, they don't quite understand exactly the system and how it should work, and prosecutors end up having to bow to that a little bit more than their discretion would normally permit. This is not to take away from victims of crime. I have been a victim of crime at various times in my life, and that sucks. But it is the system is designed to give everybody a fair shake, even the guilty people, and by that I mean punish people accordingly in the system, but not more than accordingly. Now, I'm not suggesting for a second that this indictment for Luigi is an overreach. In fact, it doesn't appear to be at all. I mean, I don't know New York law. I know Ohio law on murder, and you have basically degrees of murder. And I'm going to sort of summarize this from a common law standpoint. Like the worst kind of murder is typically one that you do on purpose. And by purpose, I mean technically it's a purposeful killing. You are acting with the kind of mental element where you wanted to, you set out to, you did it because you were doing it on purpose. I always explain this way. Anybody who's watched two kids argue, like I used to argue with my brother, and we'd go to my parents and I'd be like, yeah, and he did that on purpose. And somehow that makes it worse. Like when you do it on purpose. In other words, it wasn't an accident. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't like a quick, reckless act. It was like, you intended to hurt me. And that's what the most serious murders typically are. In Ohio, we might call that aggravated murder. And, there are even degrees of aggravated murder depending upon how you do it. Or what and that can alter what the punishment is. Something less than aggravated murder might be what we'll call hot blood. This in law school, they would teach you this. This is something they do teach you in law school, where you walk in on your wife or your girlfriend or your husband or your boyfriend in bed with another, and you sort of flip out and you beat the crap out of them, or maybe even you kill them. So that's a classic law school example of hot blood. And what it really means is there was enough provocation. You're not innocent, but you were provoked by circumstances that would reasonably provoke almost anybody into this fit of rage. Below that, you have what we'll call sort of negligent murders, or we'll start with actually reckless murders. So you're driving your car, you're texting. Because you're texting, that's pretty reckless behavior. You get in a crash and you kill somebody. That's reckless. You didn't do it on purpose. You weren't upset with some sort of hot blood rage when you did it. You just were acting sort of stupidly and recklessly. And below that, you have what I'll call sort of accidental murder, negligent murders, which are maybe where you're not doing anything wrong, but you just missed the red light, or you fell asleep at the wheel because you didn't get enough sleep last night and somebody died. Or you swung an axe and let go of it and it flew across and hit somebody in the head, and you didn't do it on purpose, but you're pretty negligent because you didn't have gloves on, or whatever the negligence theory would be. Those are sort of the levels. Now, the result on all those is the same. Somebody dies. But how it's treated is based on what the person did and what they were thinking when they did it. And here in Luigi's case, we've got what appears to be, by all rights, a very purposeful execution.
Yeah, and that's very clear from the video. Like whoever did it intentionally, which I understand, we're leaning towards Luigi here.
So what's the evidence?
As of right now, from what I've seen online, is the evidence is he was caught with money, fake IDs, and then a 3D printed silencer.
And he matches the person who's on video doing it.
Yes.
Or at least the ordinary person looking at this and saying, well, that sure as hell looks like Luigi. And then did Luigi confess?
He hasn't confessed yet.
So he hasn't made any statements to confess. Yeah. All right. So the first things first, the government's going to have to prove that Luigi did this.
Yes.
And the evidence will be what we're talking about. I don't know the case well enough. We haven't seen what's called discovery, meaning what are the witness statements, who's saying what. But what's the evidence against Luigi? We know that he looks a lot like the guy on video. So this is like your classic video. And by the way, it's really hard to commit a crime these days and not be on tape somewhere or on video somewhere.
Like even Ring cameras, they can like track you from imagine like New York City, where there's a camera on like every single corner,
every door, right?
They can track you from the minute you shot them all the way until you leave the city.
And then most people have, mine's over there. Most people have what I call their digital DNA in their pocket, which is their cell phone. And I've worked on cases where literally play by step through location analysis, your cell phone use, clients are basically, or defendants or the accused are basically tracked almost down to the second. It's not like the old days where the only thing you had was like a tower analysis. We still have that, but now it's even more detailed. So it's really difficult to get away with anything these days. Now it's a little aside, and they probably do teach you that in law school, but in practicum, it's hard to commit a crime like this without being on Front Street, literally.
Mhm. But I think the more alarming thing in this indictment that I was trying to get on was the terrorism count. I understand whoever killed him obviously did it intentionally. Like I totally agree with that. However, I just struggled to try and grasp that this was an act of terrorism, how New York like defines it.
Well, look, so you're on to something. We're going to read the indictment. I've got it up, but you're on to something before I go there. You said how New York defines it. So you're starting to think like a lawyer. I like it because being a lawyer is a lot about learning a different language and understanding logic. And this is why I get so upset about, I call it wokeness or undefining terms. And by undefining or redefining what terms mean, it matters. Language matters. And in law, it's like this logical, scientific approach to abstract human behavior. And what you have to do is we have a definition of a crime. And the idea is if the General Assembly in Ohio or your legislative branch, if Congress in the federal system is going to say you're not allowed to do something, and if you do that, it's a crime, that the law has to be defined in such a way that an ordinary person can understand it. And not just an ordinary person, but like somebody, it's got to be somebody who's distracted doing 10 things at once should be able to understand it. You have to make it simple, because if you can't make it simple, if you can't write a law that prohibits conduct and normal people can't read it and understand what they're allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do, well, then it's not fair. It violates due process. It's called vague. It's overly vague. And a reasonable person looking at it is going to say, I don't know what the hell this says, so I can't do it. Or then it's unconstitutional. So the idea here is defining terrorism. Now, we all operate day in and day out with some understanding of what we think terrorism is. And you may think, well, a terrorist is somebody who blew up the World Trade Center. A terrorist is somebody who crashed their plane into the Twin Towers. Those are terrorists. But in law, we have to go farther than that. Like if you're going to say you're not allowed to commit terrorism, and if you do, that's a felony. What does that mean? I don't know. It all depends. I'm ironically worked on a case recently in Ohio where somebody was accused of a crime that included a definition of terrorism. So I'd never had it. And look, how many terrorism cases are going to knock on your door as a criminal defense lawyer? Very few over the years, but this one was. And I'm not going to go into detail because I can't remember off the top of my head, but it was something like this. Terrorism means that this was a threat of terrorism, but it means that there was a threat that was designed to influence a governmental entity to do something or not do something, sort of like an ultimatum. So release this prisoner or else I'm going to blow something up.
Yeah. That
would be terrorism or a terrorist threat in my case. And it turns out it didn't fit, right? Now, I don't know how terrorism is defined in New York law, but it matters. Here's what the indictment says. Luigi is charged with murder in the second degree as a crime of terrorism in violation of Penal Law 125.251 and 490.25. The defendant in the County of New York on or about December 4th, with intent to intimidate or coerce a civilian population, influence the policy of a unit of government by intimidation or coercion, and affect the conduct of a unit of government by murder, assassination, or kidnapping, committed the specified offense of murder in the second degree. That defendant with the intent to, looks like there might be a mistake, specified offense of murder in the second degree in that defendant with intent to the death of caused the death of another, or intent to the death of another person, caused the death of Brian Thompson. I think there's a typo in the indictment. That's ironic.
They're real people, they're law clerks, they're just trying to type them up.
This is one you get right? The world's going to see this one.
Yeah.
At any rate, this is what this sort of tracks with Ohio's understanding of terrorism. Now, look, you can charge somebody with this, but I don't know that they can prove it. This means we deal in law, and particularly criminal law, all the time. The accused or the suspects or the defendant's intent matters. But it's not like a Minority Report with Tom Cruise where we can look at the future and understand what somebody's thinking or what they will do or what their intent really is. We can't yet look into people's minds and say, well, he did that on purpose.
I think it's gonna be hard to show that the intent was to influence people because like how do you know for all we know, he just wanted to kill the guy
Uh,
and he didn't think that maybe he didn't even think the world was gonna like know about it or care about it. Maybe he didn't know there was gonna be a camera, maybe.
there is one word I will throw at you in response to that: manifesto.
Yeah, but it's saying there exactly, like I want the whole world to know.
Good
I
questions.
don't know.
Good questions.
We have
But
to see
I
it.
understand the manifesto used language like the insurance industry is horrible, rotten, unfair. It doesn't work. It's broken. I think at one point Luigi even admitted that I don't know anything about it. This is beyond my expertise, ironically, but he knew enough apparently to kill somebody over it. So look, the evidence of this in Luigi's case is his manifesto. So how often do you get like I just said? So you don't often get a chance to look into somebody's mind and understand what they were thinking, what their intent was, unless they write a manifesto and tell us. And this is where Luigi has provided some evidence that may amount to terrorism. Now, again, it's not what we think. It's not like a crashing planes into the Twin Towers. The definition only requires intimidation or coercion affect the conduct of a unit of government by murder, assassination, or kidnapping, or the policy of a unit of government, or intimidate or coerce a civilian population. So look, let's take this at its broadest on behalf of the people of New York. They're arguing that Luigi's intent was to change the government's approach at healthcare. And I'm going to do that by killing somebody. The problem is, let's see, let me read this again. The problem is he kills somebody. Was the intent to kill? Was the intent to kill not to? It's dicey, but that's going to be their argument. I'm not seeing a quid pro quo, and that's the difference between this law and Ohio's. Like I'm not seeing a quid pro quo where if you don't do this, I will do that, or the act has already happened, and then we find the manifesto. I don't know. So proving Luigi's intent will be probably by and large reliant upon the manifesto. I think that, and that's a lesser crime. It seems like that's murder in the second degree as a crime of terrorism. The lead charge here is murder in the first degree, which basically said, now let's read it. The defendant in the county of New York, being more than 18 years old at the time of the commission of the crime with the intent to cause the death of another person, caused the death of Brian Thompson, and said person was killed in furtherance of an act of terrorism involving a violent act and acts dangerous to human life that were in violation of the criminal laws of the state and were intended to intimidate, of course. So they've incorporated terrorism into this one as well. What's interesting here to me is I'm not seeing, and then he's got a bunch of weapons crimes because you're not allowed to have a gun in New York.
Are you not allowed to have a gun in New York?
You got to have a license or something to have a handgun. Stuff like that. Or you're not allowed to use a gun to commit a crime.
I think the one in Pennsylvania is like having the 3D printed silencer. I know there's like a law against that.
What I'm surprised about here. Now, here's the third count is just murder in the second degree. The defendant in the county of New York on or about December 4th with intent to cause the death of another person caused the death of Brian Thompson. So I don't know. Look, in Ohio, this has all the trimmings of a case that would be aggravated murder, the most serious type of murder. You've got an obvious, purposeful, intentional. We use the terms lying in wait, where you're sort of ambushing somebody to kill them. I don't know if a similar charge exists in New York. If it doesn't, why they've only charged this as murder in the second degree and only made it murder in the first degree by terrorism. I don't know New York law to know if that was intentional, if that was only because the law doesn't permit it. We could do some research and figure it out. Maybe if you're interested in us doing the research, let us know. Leave me a comment and I'll zero in on it. We can you can employ your law clerking skills upstairs.
And I totally agree with the third count here. It was just the first and second. That's where I just started. That's where my overreach bug started itching me, and I was like, I don't know. I
don't have a problem necessarily with these charges, but I might have a problem if he's not also charged with some sort of intentional murder that would be in the first degree, because that seems sort of obvious. I would be shocked. I will be shocked if New York does not have some crime that actually is the most serious on the levels of crimes in New York that was committed here. Because look, what isn't first degree murder if you don't do it intentionally, or if you don't, if this isn't rather, you plan to kill somebody, you actually do kill somebody, You ambush that individual, and this was an execution style murder. And people ask me all the time questions like this: would I represent this guy? Yeah, I would. I absolutely would. Do I think that this is one of the most horrible crimes I've ever seen? Yes, I do. I absolutely do. I find it, socially intriguing that people give this guy a pass because he happened to execute somebody in an industry that they don't like. But it's still an execution. A father is still dead. A husband is still dead. A human life was taken. This is what criminal laws are designed to deal with. There is no excuse for this type of execution in our society, and I still would represent him. So, go to sleep at night with that one, folks.
Yeah, I mean, I would too. I still just gonna keep hammering in on this. I just think the word terrorism gets overused, and I just don't think this was an applicable situation where it should have been done. And we're watering down the word, and it's losing value.
Well, look, terrorism means you're intending to coerce a civilian population, influence the policies of a unit of government by intimidation or coercion, and affect the conduct of a unit of government by murder, assassination, or kidnapping. So look, it fits the definition on some level. Now, you don't like it because your notion of terrorism is something different. I'll give you another perfect example. And you're working on a case with me upstairs. We have a client charged with kidnapping. And I think your first reaction was, well, where's the kidnapping?
Yeah.
I had the first reaction, the first kidnapping case I had. I expected, all right, so somebody threw a pillowcase over somebody's head, tied their hands behind their back, and took them across state lines and asked for ransom. Actually had that case. But then I get lots of kidnapping cases where it's a rape. And I'm like, well, hold on, it's a rape, not a kidnapping. The kidnapping comes into play by definition. Again, you got to look at the definitions of the terms. If I, through force or threat of force, prevent somebody from moving or leaving, that can be kidnapping. It can also be abduction. What's abduction? Well, it's almost kidnapping. It's like all the terms matter. And one of the things that you have to do when you become a lawyer is let go of our old world, not completely, because you still have to translate, but you got to let go of that and understand that you have to enter this new world where everything has its own definition and everything has its own meaning. And every now and then you run into a situation where the law says, well, this has the common meaning that we all understand. And you're like, all right, I know what that is then. But you really don't, because everybody's got a little bit different understanding. We love definitions in law because it gives us something concrete that we can build upon, rely upon, and understand. And just because it's a term that we use in our civilian lives a little bit differently, like terrorism, doesn't mean that it can't be charged as a crime for conduct that you don't necessarily foresee in your head when you hear the term.
When I was thinking kidnapping, I was thinking old school, when Will Ferrell's driving him around,
Yeah,
picking
there
him
you
up in
go.
the van.
You're my boy, Blue. Yeah, that's right. So look, that's the kidnapping we all think of, but it doesn't have to be that. That might be the worst form of kidnapping. Not that movie, but taking somebody, moving them across state lines or whatever, that becomes a kidnapping offense in its own right. But in Ohio, you can commit kidnapping without ever taking anybody anywhere. If I just say, if you move anywhere, if you leave this room, I'm going to shoot you. And I mean it, and I'm displaying a show of force with a firearm or something else, that could be kidnapping. All right. Well, look, there's probably lots more we're going to do on the Luigi case as this thing unfolds. I like your question, though. It's like, is this terrorism? Do you guys think it's terrorism? Leave us a comment. I'll be happy to kick this around some more. And then we're going to do some additional research on exactly what is first-degree murder other than a terrorism type of act associated with murder in New York. I've got a buddy up there, maybe a prosecutor buddy. I know from long ago. I can probably get him and get some answers. But this is the Lawyer Talk podcast. They don't teach you that in law school. We love it when you interact with us. You can do that in the comments of our social media sites. You can go to lawyertalkpodcast.com. There's a place you can leave us a question, send us a topic. We'll be happy to cover it. If you want to be a guest on the show, we do that periodically. Go ahead and send us a note, and we'll see if we can get something scheduled. If you got the chops and it's worthy of discussion, I harbor no prejudice. I talk to almost everybody. Whether we can work it into an episode, that's a different story, but we'll do our best. Until then, Lawyer Talk podcast, off the record, on the air. Until next time. Hey, Steve Palmer here from Lawyer Talk. Thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed it. Check us out, all our social media. Like, share, interact, ask your own questions. We're here for you.